So I've decided on my next read, and it's going to be the Take Me to the Stars duology by Sylvain Neuvel. I have read all the works in the Themis files and really enjoyed them, which is unusual because I'm not a big sci-fi person, and the only sci-fi I have read has been older sci-fi, so like Dune. But I really enjoyed the Themis files. Now these ones I'm not sure about because they are sci-fi, very much in Sylvain Neuvel's style, but these are, well, this one anyway, is based in World War II, and World War II fiction is something I do not enjoy. So I'm excited to see how this works. And then this one is based in 1968 around the first manned rocket launched into space. This is only a duology at the moment, I think. Don't know if it's going to be longer, if it's just two, but these are both less than 300 pages each. The audiobooks are about 9 hours each, and I listen to them on 2.5-3 times speed. So each of these is only going to take me about 3 hours to listen to. So I'm hoping at least to read most of A History of What Came Next today, and then Until the Last of Me started either tonight or tomorrow. And then from there, probably going to read the Bone Spindle and then the Severed Thread. I also want to get into Game of Thrones because it was my book club pick for November and December, being as it was so big, and I haven't started it. But our January pick is Nevermore by Jessica Townsend, which is not short, but it is a children's book, so I should be able to read that pretty quickly. So yeah, I'm gonna jump into A History of What Comes Next, and I'll check in with you in a bit. Hey guys, so this morning I am starting A History of What Comes Next by Sylvain Neuvel. I know it's going to be sci-fi fantasy with historical fiction elements, but if this is anything like the Themis files, it's really going to throw me for a loop. So obviously it's pretty short, so I'll update you probably, I'm not sure, it depends on how quickly I read it, but definitely early on, around the middle, and then towards the end. So stay tuned. Of the way through A History of What Came Next, and this is really interesting. So Mia is part of a race called the Cubis, and basically they're an all-female race that collect and pass down knowledge onto humans to advance them in order to save basically the world from its own destruction. And they've been doing this for millennia, being as we get a POV from 16th century witch trials, and they're always mother and daughter. They can't stay three for very long. So in this case, Mia's grandmother killed herself as her mother did before her because they can't stay three for very long. They're also being hunted by an entity known as the Tracker, who is trying to wipe them out. So basically, they fled Germany Mia and her mother Zara, before the start of the Second World War, and now in 1945, Mia is being sent back to Germany to rescue Warner von Braun, who is a rocket scientist, and to get him to the Americans before the Russians get to him, so that the Americans can be the first to land on the moon, or to go into space. So she finds him and she's posing as his niece Lily, in order to get him to the Americans. But now she's kind of stuck because she's now stuck with the German army. The Russians closing in on them, as are the Americans, and it's not looking good. But Mia and her predecessors had this ability where it's almost like foresight. So when they're stopped by German patrol, Mia has this vision of how to kill them all in less than 30 seconds to protect Van Braun, who is her charge. This doesn't come to fruition because Van Braun is a very charming man and manages to defuse the situation. But this frightens Mia. So she's now stuck in this god-awful position. Her mother wants her to come home, and has got a coded message to her letting her know that her tracker is closed and that she needs to leave. But given the situation is, Mia can't just leave, especially with Van Braun, because he won't leave without all the scientists and the family of the scientists under his care, which is close to 5,000 people. So she cannot covertly escape with a small town following behind her. So she's kind of stuck right now. It's not told in the same format as the Themis Files, which was diary entries, journals. This is told more of a prose style, but we do have multiple POVs, even though they aren't listed. The narrator changes. So Mia and her mother Zara have one narrator, and Van Braun has another. So you can tell who's talking when you listen to the audiobook. But if I was reading this without it, I would be a little confused, because the narration changes aren't labelled. But I am excited to see where it goes, and I will probably check back in again around the halfway mark because it's so short. But yeah, see you soon. So I'm back home now from the holidays, and I'm over halfway through A History of What Comes Next by Sylvain Louvel. It's getting really interesting now. So Mia has got the German scientist. Germany have lost the war, and she and her mother are living in Russia. And her mother basically explains that even though the Americans have the V2 rocket, they aren't doing anything with it. So they're in Russia to give the same technology to the Russians and basically start the America versus Russia space race. But Mia doesn't understand why, she doesn't get it. One good thing to come out of being in Russia is Mia meets Billy, who is a young woman of colour in Russia, which at this time is pretty rare, and they end up striking up a friendship and eventual relationship. This is so Billy and Mia are in a relationship, and this is really bad for the Kibitsu, purely because they need to breed. They need another generation to continue the line. So Mia and her mother are the 99. And Mia's mother has told her that it's time for her to have a child, which Mia doesn't feel ready to do, but we learn from her mother's perspective that none of them really felt ready. They were just kind of thrust into it. And we do get a bit more from the trackers, but that's still not fitting together quite yet. But I know from the Themis files that there will be elements of this book that aren't going to make sense until I read until The Last of Us, because that's what happened in the Themis files. So yeah, I will check back in again at the 3/4 mark. Of the way through a history of what comes next, and now things are kicking off. Mia, when she goes back to Germany to collect this kernel, because her mother's told her she needs to be more active in this situation. She basically collects this kernel, gets him on side to head up the Russian side of the space race. And in bringing him and all the people back to Russia, she decides that she's going to stop in Bad Zaro, which she learned about from Dita, that her mother never went back there after something happened. Her mother warned her against it, but Mia goes and does it. The second she gets there, she gets this flood of memories from being a child, where she brutally killed 2 of the children who were bullying her. And this breaks Mia's kind of image of them being the good guys and the trackers being the bad guys. And she kind of just stops being involved. She lets the scientists do their own thing, even though they're failing pretty badly from the Russian side of it anyway. And her mother is really worried. This causes a lot of guilt in Mia, which we see in her relationship with Billy, which is now a full-blown relationship. And even though Mia doesn't know what being in love is, I believe she is. So, but in the chapters we get from the past, from earlier Keepser, we realise that them and the trackers are very similar, and they do have a great propensity for violence. And it was actually the 7th of the 99 who realised this when she amassed basically an all-female army and slaughtered millions of people. And it was her that created the rules that they now follow, before killing herself and her 2 youngest daughters, leaving her eldest to be the 8th and carry on the line. And it was also her that set the rule that there could never be 3 of them for very long, because when there's more than 2, they tend to grow in number very quickly. And obviously this breaks me a little bit, but she has Billy to lean on, even though Billy doesn't know the whole truth, doesn't even know her name's Mia, she knows her as Nina. But her mother manages to convince her that regardless of the other 98, her mother and everyone that came before her, Mia is her own person and she does belong there. And this kind of jolts her back into getting into the space race. So at this point we've gone from 1945 to 1951, and don't have that much left, so I am excited to see how Nouvelle ends the book. Just finished a history of what comes next, and hell, that ending was emotional. We get to see a lot of the history around the Kitsu, and one notable event that takes place with the 10th, and what she does that leads to most of these events. We also learn more about the trackers and Kitsu and how they are interconnected, and how this is all related to the space race. But it's not just that, it's a story of people. So a lot of this book is Mia trying to find out who she is. She does this with Billy, she does this with Sergei, she does this with her mother. But it isn't until the last 20 or so pages that she finally figures out who she is and what her mission is going forward. And her mission just happens to be the mission of the 100. But she wants to know what they are. And this is a question she gets asked herself a lot, but it becomes, instead of who am I, what am I? Because Mia has had feelings for a long time that their race isn't from Earth originally, and her necklace kind of proves that, as it's made from a mineral that isn't found on Earth, so it had to come from another planet. And then the trackers and some of the information they reveal, coupled with this generational knowledge of space and getting to space, makes that very clear to me that whatever they aren't human. Despite having one human parent, but we do learn that when this coupling happens between Kitsu and human, only DNA from the mother, the Kitsu, is passed on to the child, which is why they look like clones of each other, because they essentially are. There is a lot of hard-hitting stuff that happens in this book, and there are some very dark topics touched upon, war, genocide, sexual assault, rape, the death of a loved one, the death of a child, and much more. So do be careful going into this, but if you're a history fan, a science fan, a space fan, definitely pick this up. It was a 5-star prediction for me, and it ended up being a 5 stars. So definitely check it out.